Okay, we're back. Let's now move on to null hypothesis testing, the logic behind it, and as what I have emphasized a while ago, all of those that we have discussed previously, are building blocks to our understanding of what null hypothesis testing is. So null hypothesis testing, what is it? So it's a process that helps researchers to decide whether to accept or reject a formulated statement or hypothesis after the evaluation of a sample and draw inferences about the population of interest. Okay, so a number of things here that are notable be that so one, null hypothesis testing is used by researchers to decide, sabi dito, whether to accept or reject a particular statement or hypothesis. I guess you're familiar with the term hypothesis. No? So a hypothesis basically is a statement that, specifically for the null hypothesis, that states that two variables are not associated or are not related, no, and then the alternative to that would be to say that two things are related, no? So that's the most simple, that's the simplest hypothesis no one can think of, no. For example, if you say, if I eat a plate of peanuts, then I would perform better in a quiz, no, because peanuts though is a brain food, no. So that particular statement is discussing the apparent relationship, no, between eating peanuts, no, and performance in a quiz, no. Or one can say that if I review for a quiz, then I would have better scores compared to those who did not review for a quiz. So again, that particular statement is or contains two variables, and we are discussing the apparent relationship or association of the two variables. Otherwise, we can also state the null hypothesis, which basically is the same, but instead of saying that there's a relationship, we say that there's no relationship. No. Another notable thing here is that the evidence or the lack of evidence now pertaining to the hypothesis is based on the evaluation of sample data. However, even if we draw our evidence from a sample, sometimes we can also draw inferences about the findings, and to a limited extent we can infer the findings to the population, right now. So if this particular sample come from, let's say for example, students of a university, then whatever evidence we find from that sample to a limited extent can also be suggested as applicable or probably true to the population from which the sample came from. All right. Another thing, it is intended to help researchers differentiate between real and random patterns. So this is a very interesting bit, no. So when we are talking about associations, relationships, or let's say for example, differences, in a nutshell, all of these things pertain to patterns, right? Now what makes a pattern a pattern? Anyone? Or when do you say that there is a pattern? When there is repetition, when there is sequence, that's true. When it happens with regularity, okay, that's also true. When there is a connection or similarities, okay, it follows a particular form, a gesture, no? When it is consistently done, okay, when it is repeated. All right. Interesting. So I guess so. Those are crucial terms like repetition, consistency, regularity. I also like the word form. Configuration. And ang sabi dito, sometimes patterns are real, but sometimes we seem to perceive a pattern, but that is only a random pattern. So I guess patterns can be meaningful, and if they're meaningful, they are real. But sometimes patterns can also be, now when you say random patterns, what kind of words come to your mind when you talk about a random pattern? So parang you see something, it seems meaningful, pero alam mo na that's just a random pattern. How would you describe a random pattern? What words come to your mind when you say random pattern? Oh, yan, no. So, may pattern yung clouds, no. Mukha siyang wolf, no. Mukha siyang aso. Ito rin, no. Yung nasa side, mukha rin siyang a dog, no. Meron pang buntot dito. Tapos parang nakaupo na eh. Ito naman parang umaalulong na aso, no. So sometimes we see patterns, but do you think these are meaningful patterns? And why is it a pattern? No? Parang there is a form, right? No, there is a configuration, and we can attribute, no, to some extent, some kind of meaning to it. No, but we all know that these are just sort of random formation of clouds, which I guess the crucial word is by chance, no, or by of a very unlikely probability, no, formed in a certain way, and thus we can see some kind of pattern or some kind of meaning or form or configuration. So there are patterns that are real, and then there are patterns that are random. When I was younger, I thought I had superpowers because of a certain, of course, senseless pattern. No? So when I was young, I thought I can control water, Aquaman. No? I come from Lipa. And for those of you who come from Lipa as well, anyway, in the 90s, mahina, no, ang tubig, no, sa Lipa, sa province, no. And if you want to take a bath, no, ng matino, you have to wake up early. And so one of these mornings, no, 6 o'clock, na preparing for school, I was in high school. Ang natira na lang sa akin ay kalahating timbang tubig. So medyo frustrate maligo ng kalahating timbang tubig lang, no. Hindi matatanggal lahat ng mga sabon sa katawan, no. So napabuntong hininga ako, no. So yung faucet, by the way, nakabukas, no, pero wala nang tumutulo, no. And then I inhaled and exhaled. At sa pag-exhale ko, biglang nagkaroon ng mga, hindi naman malakas na natulo ng tubig, pero nagkaroon ng, how do you call that? Parang droplets of water, no. So parang biglang mayroong konting lumabas na tubig sa faucet, no. Na very briefly lang naman, no. And then, sabi ko, that's interesting, no. So I'm starting to see a pattern, no. Pero sabi dapat daw regular, no. So I inhaled again. And as I exhaled, bigla na namang may lumabas na konting tubig, no. And then for a third time, no, more deliberately. At bigla na namang merong lumabas na tubig, no. So there seems to be sort of a regularity, no. There seems to be a pattern, no, of my exhaling, and then droplets of water coming out of the faucet. No? So for a while, I thought, no, I had powers over water. No? Although up to now, siguro merong physical explanation. No? It may have been coincidence. Baka rin naman may physical explanation. For example, baka sa pag-exhale ko, nadi-disturb ko yung molecules, no, sa banyo. At kapag nag-move yung molecule sa banyo, na di-disrupt ko yung surface tension ng tubig na natitira sa gripo, at pag nag-wiggle yung natitirang tubig sa faucet, na bigla siyang babagsak, no. So there might be na some, so it might actually have been a real pattern, no. Although the explanation is not superpowers, but rather, physics. One time I also thought I had powers over electricity naman, no? So akala ko meron akong superpower naman this time naman pa sa electricity. So nasa lipa na naman ako, and nag-brown out, no? So walang ilaw. So out of nowhere, no, nakahiga lang ako, nandun ako sa bahay ng mga pinsan ko. Out of nowhere, I started counting down. No? So I said, what? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And as I said, 0. No? Biglang nagkaroon ng ilaw. Again, no? A coincidence. So again, the two events that seems to sort of coincide no, in a very timely manner no, to think that there might have been a pattern. So that's another thing about null hypothesis testing. It helps us to differentiate no patterns that are real with regularity, with repetition, versus patterns that are random, no, or patterns that are only based on coincidences, or I guess the most common word that is used no, would be chance occurrences. No? Nagkataon lang na when I counted down, pagdating ng 0, biglang nagkailaw. No? Which seems to be a pattern, no? But it's really just a random pattern. Okay. And to be more precise, no, in the context of research, when we talk about patterns, we're talking about relationships between two variables. So are they real relationships between two variables, or is the seeming relationship that we're seeing is just some kind of a random fluctuation that would be expected to happen by chance. No? Now, there are many versions of the null hypothesis testing. When you say relationship between two variables, so what exactly do we mean? And how is this relationship between two variables, how is this appreciated as a pattern that might be real or might be random? So I'm going to give you an example. So let's say, for example, we have two groups of students. No? Let's say we have two variables. No? The first variable is reviewing. Okay. Of course, everybody knows how to review. Okay. And then, ang notion natin, common sense would say that if you review, you will perform well in a quiz if you're reviewing for a quiz. No? So, quiz and if you perform well in a quiz, no, that would be indicated by your quiz score. No? So having a high quiz score would mean to say that you performed well. Having a low quiz score would mean to say that you performed not so good. All right. So reviewing, and we have an assumption that these two are related. No? Do you agree that reviewing and one's performance in a quiz that which you reviewed for no, have a relationship? And if they do, what do we expect? No? What pattern do we expect? A pattern that indicates a relationship. Anyone? What do you think? If we are to say that reviewing has a relationship with quiz scores, what kind of pattern should we expect from a group of students? Let's simplify reviewing as just yes or no thing. It's either you review or you did not review. So that is our variation. Some say yes, so Y stands for yes, no. No, no, yes, 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 no, no, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes, yes. Okay. So ito yung mga participants mo. So some said yes, others said no. Now, what kind of pattern do we expect for us to say that reviewing has some kind of relationship with the quiz scores? Like if we plot the quiz scores here, what kind of pattern do we expect to happen? No? Under the assumption that reviewing has something to do with quiz scores. And reviewing here specifically is just either you review or you did not review. The kind of pattern that we expect is that those who reviewed would have higher scores and those who did not review would have lower scores. So let's say, for example, the quiz is over 25. So this guy who reviewed got 24, 15, 14, 20, 21, 25, 17, 19. All right. So this is the kind of pattern that we would sort of expect right now. And so what exactly do we call this pattern? No. Focus on this. No. Reviewing is a variable. Why is it a variable? Because the state of reviewing varies, right? And what is the variation? It's just a binomial variation. It's either you review or you did not review. So what you're seeing here, no, yes, no, no, yes, 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 no, no, yes, that is what you call as a variation, right? Variation. And this one, the measurement of the quiz scores of or the performance is in terms of raw scores, right? Of course, given that there are different scores here, that is also a variation. So here we see variation, and in here we also see variation. And if you take a look at the variation of the two variables, if what the other students are saying is true, we would expect that if you reviewed, you'd have a high score like this. And if you did not review, you'd have a low score like this. And if we try to look at, i-highlight natin lahat ng mga nag-review and take a look at their scores. No? So most of them, 20, may isang 17, versus those who did not review, yung mga hindi nag-review, we will notice that their scores compared to those who reviewed are comparatively a bit lower, right? So we will notice that the way this varies seem to coincide, seem to go along the way this particularly variations also vary. And when you have two variations that seem to vary together, what do we call that? Anyone? If you have two sets of variations na parang, yung variation nila parang may pattern. Kapag nag-yes to, mataas to. Kapag hindi nag-review, mababa. Kapag nag-review, mataas. What do you think? What's the term for this? No, when two variations seem to vary together. Give me a word. What word are we looking for? Anyone? Two variations that seem to coincide with one another. We have co-variation. No. Co, of course, is a prefix referring to, two things going along together. No? So co-variation. So when you talk about patterns, relationships, it's just a matter of asking, is there co-variation or not? No, is there co-variation or not? Of course, we don't have yet evidence na if there really is covariation, but at face value, when we try to look at these numerical values per individual who either said no, yes, they reviewed or no, they didn't, there seems to be a covariation, a pattern. So the question now is this that we are observing, is this real or is this random? Kasi if you have, let's say for example, two groups of individuals and all of them said that they reviewed, no? Tapos hinati mo siya, no? Etong grupo na to, no? At itong grupo na to. If you get the average of this and the average of this, for sure magkaiba pa rin sila, no? So bakit magkaiba? Well, pare-pareho naman sila nag-review, no? Then that would be sort of a random pattern, no? But if we have this, no? And let's say for example, i-group natin. So kapag pinagsama-sama natin itong mga nagsabi ng no, and we computed for the average quiz scores of all of those who said no, and the average quiz scores of all of those who said yes, they reviewed. Let's do that. Average, sorry, equals average. Ito, equals average. Yan. So, yung mga nag-said ng yes, ang average nila ay 21.5. Yung mga nag-said ng no, ang average nila ay 13.28. No? So, is this difference? No? Is this real? So, is there covariation? No? Kapag ganito, mabababa ang score. Kapag yes daw, relatively matataas ang score. So, is that seeming covariation? Is that real? Is this difference real or is this just a product of coincidence. So that's basically what we mean, no, when we say relationship between two variables. So I hope that that is clear now. That when we say we're looking at the relationship between two variables, we're looking for whether this relationship is a real or a random thing, no? A real or random pattern. That pattern that we are referring to is specifically the pattern of covariation, meaning to say the variation in one variable seem to coincide with the variation in the other variable. Okay? All right.